Welcome to Recross the Paths, where we celebrate the Cube community one conversation at a time. My name is Cade. Today, my guest is Mark. Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me on the podcast, Cade.
Though it is summertime as we record this, we're going to be going back to school today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so excited to talk about your project, Strixhaven Study Abroad, one of several projects I believe you've worked on.
Yeah, I've had a couple of things here and there, but this has definitely kind of been my baby over the past year and a half. It is the main cube that I've been putting my energy into, and it's definitely the one I'm most proud of at the moment.
Well, and here right on the heels of Secrets of Strixhaven,
Mm-hmm.
now you've got some maybe reinvigorated opportunities for how best to engage with it.
Oh yeah, it was honestly a bit of a double-edged sword getting a new set for the cube, because it was oh awesome, all this new content, all these new cards that I can include in the cube, and then it's I gotta figure out how to make room for 30 new cards.
Yeah, I actually have to do it. It's not just theory crafting anymore.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, before we get too far into the cube itself, to set the stage a little bit, Mark, why cube?
Yeah, so it's funny for me because this question for me is more just why Magic. So I played Magic a little bit as a kid, in middle school, didn't really understand the rules. Played Fast Mana with my brother, where it's you got to put all your lands and play at once.
It's like everybody has fast bond.
Yeah, basically, which is apparently a more common kid rule set than you'd think. I've seen other stories about people doing it.
Amazing.
And then kind of fell off, didn't really play much through high school or college. And then after college, I actually started playing Magic again as an adult. In the town I was in, I had a friend who had a cube. And so my first experience and exposure to Magic was through cube. And that's kind of just what I did. So he had a powered vintage cube type deal, which really exposed me to the world of Magic. And then we'd play that. We'd play a lot of EDH. And I just really came to enjoy the skill and variety that came with drafting and being able to open all your cards and feel you're navigating something on the fly. It's very skill testing in a way that's you can really mess up a draft and you can really go wrong. And I think that stakes really makes things very exciting and very interesting every single time.
Yeah, how much of that at the start was drafting? I know you mentioned you kind of had a sense of the rules before, but how much of that was hop in, we're just going to jump in with your friend's vintage cube?
So I think we may have played a little bit of Commander first, and so that kind of got me back into remembering how the rules worked and learning about this newfangled Planeswalker cards and stuff like that. And I can attack a card, and so I think we did kind of jump in, and they were kind of yeah, just pick all the red cards and it'll probably work out. And it did. I remember I did win some matches, or maybe not matches, but I definitely picked up games that first draft. But I was just hooked again pretty quickly. It's a game with a lot of depth, and it really just brought me back into the fold. It was a bit like riding a bike, where it's oh yeah, oh this works like this, and this works like this, and kind of just remembering all the stuff. And a lot of what we probably did early on was EDH, just because it was a smaller town and we weren't able to get a full pod together for drafting. But I did do a lot of drafting the cube. It was a very cool cube too. They it was him and his brother who maintained it, and they had a bunch of altars and a bunch of really fun cards, and it's it was very classic vintage cube. It's a very unique experience, and I think I'm very lucky that I got to have that be my reintroduction to Magic.
How soon did you then get into wanting to build your own as opposed to just playing the one that was provided?
Yeah. So it actually came via CubeCon. So I actually went to the first CubeCon because I was well, I really like Cube. And I was doing a lot of retail draft and really liked all this different stuff. And I was in a spot where I could go at the time. And so I went to the first CubeCon and I played a bunch of really just cool and interesting cubes. And I think that was, a real watershed moment for a lot of people in terms of seeing what was out there. And it kind of broke the mold of cubes don't have to be this one archetype of cube. So from there, I really wanted to build a cube that kind of combined all the cards that I really loved. And so from there, I ended up building, it's kind of a peasant plus cube. It was a lot of pet cards, fun and wacky build arounds. It was built around the shards. So each shard kind of had a theme, and then they're kind of lower power level. So you'd often have 2 color decks within it. It was just a good time, and that was kind of my first stab at making a cube. And it's very much kind of throw the cards I like together and stir them and cut outliers and add new cards until it felt right.
We're probably going to hear a little bit of the echoes of that idea here in Strixhaven.
Yeah, I mean, that does kind of take us to Strixhaven Study Abroad. It was really my second project. I've had like other ideas I kind of like picked up and like played around with. But Study Abroad was one that had kind of been noodling in my head for a while. And I don't know if maybe we could take this opportunity to talk more about the conceit of the cube.
Yeah, I think that's a great spot. Start by giving us the overview of what this project is, and then let's dive in.
Strixhaven Study Abroad, it really was born of I really liked the Strixhaven set. I thought it did a lot of really, really cool things. And so the like North Star and like what I want to get out of Strixhaven Study Abroad is like I want people to sit down and play it, and I want them to come away with the experience that you got playing the original Strixhaven. There's a bunch of stuff that I've done to do that, but just at a high level, what the cube is taking the core idea of Strixhaven, which is these 5 color pairs. I have shifted them from the enemy color pairs to the allied color pairs, and built a kind of spell-centric environment that supports them and has instants and sorceries as the prime player like in the draft environment. So a huge part of that is, of course, lesson and learn, which are an amazing draft mechanic and a big part of like what I really loved about the original Strixhaven and a big part of what I knew I wanted to bring into Study Abroad. And so for people who aren't familiar, lesson is a subtype that can go on instants or sorceries, and it has no inherent rules text. It's kind of like a creature type or like shrine on like enchantments. But then there are other cards which refer to them, and in the original Strixhaven, these were learn cards. And so learn was a keyword where if a card said to learn, that meant that you could go and you could grab a lesson card from your sideboard, you could reveal it, and you could put it into your hand. And this is like one of, if not the coolest draft matters mechanics Wizards has ever made. It expands your deck, and it adds this like layer of cards where these aren't going to be in your deck ever. You're never going to draw these cards. And yet having access to them is so powerful because you have 4 or 5 cards that let you pick like the right lesson at the right moment. And although lessons were very underpowered as like cards that you would want to be in your main deck, and yet the flexibility and the tutorability just made them these incredible cards. I think, environmental sciences, it's a 2-mana sorcery. It lets you go fetch a basic and gain 2 life. And it was like an A to A minus like grade in the limited set. I don't know if grades weren't really around like in that way yet. I feel like with 17 lands like that they are now, but like it would be in that level if it were released today.
Yeah, and then when it was revisited in like the Avatar set, getting similar things like the card in the similar vein where you got to go find a basic was just huge game.
Yeah, I did not draft any Avatar at all. I'm not the biggest Universes Beyond hater in the world, but they just don't do it for me, and so I tend to skip those sets. And so I believe you, but I just don't have anything to add.
No, it's just kind of like I don't think we expected lessons to appear in that set, and so then all of a sudden getting several for something like this that without the learn half, you got to...
Right, yeah. Yeah, so that was really interesting for me, was trying to figure out how to incorporate that or not. I ended up not incorporating them in my cube, and part of that is flavor reasons. But when I first wanted to make the cube, I was like, okay, like I really loved Strixhaven. I would love to have like a Strixhaven cube. Let me look into like making a set cube, like for Strixhaven, because that's kind of like the natural thing to do. No disrespect to set cubes, it just didn't quite appeal to me. Like there wasn't enough like kind of creative input, and it was like, well, I'm just like kind of taking the cards from Strixhaven and like throwing them into a bucket, and then that's kind of it.
Which is not necessarily bad.
Right.
But like there are different ways to tackle that too.
Yeah, exactly. Like I really like the creative aspect of Cube and like feel like you're like building something and building an experience. And I kind of want to like build a new experience like in that still kind of like captured that original Strixhaven. That kind of led into, okay, like what is like a way I can like shift this? And it's like, okay, cool. Like what if we did allied colors instead of enemy? And then you start looking and it's like, okay, where does that leave us lesson-wise? And a lot of the lessons are very much tailored towards the enemy color pairs and like the original schools, like as you would expect. And there's a lot of like little things that are done to kind of support the original schools. There's like enemy hybrid colored lessons which make creatures so they can be in like a multiple like varieties of decks.
Like the mascot tokens.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So the mascot tokens, Inkling summoning is make a 2/1 flyer token, and it's 1 and it's hybrid Orzhov. So the idea is like, you can play that in your Witherbloom deck, your green-black deck, you can play that in your white-black deck, or you can play that in your red-white deck, and it'll be castable in any one of those 3. But then there's no real equivalent when you're trying to go into the allied colors. So it kind of very quickly came to, okay, if I want to make this idea work, like I need to errata some cards. So that kind of led me to looking into like, okay, what if I put like lesson on them and you can maybe learn for these instead? And then it's like, okay, but then there isn't really like a ton of learn cards either that kind of like support this. It was actually like, it's in one set. There isn't like a huge palette to be working with here. That kind of also naturally led me to starting to add learn to cards. And so there's a whole bunch of cards in my cube which are tagged with lesson and learn. I physically printed out pieces of paper and like glued them onto the cards.
Excellent.
And they designate which ones have had lesson added as a subtype, and then which ones have had the learn keyword added. I have very intentionally kept a light approach to this. I think you're already asking a lot of people, like in a cube, to digest and absorb a lot of new cards. And then when you're doing like rules modification on top of it, I definitely wanted to keep it as light a touch as possible. So I have only added lesson to sorceries, not instants.
Oh.
Yeah, so this is something, I don't know how many people actually realize this, but the original Strixhaven, the lessons were all actually only sorceries. The rules said that you could put this on an instant or a sorcery, but wizards only put them on sorceries, and I think this just kind of helps narrow the decision trees that players have to walk through when they're like thinking about their learn board, where it's like, okay, I can learn for this at instant speed, and I can grab one of these like 3 instants and do this. Then if you think about like your opponent also having to think through like what your learn board looked like and what you could have, it just, I think, becomes a mess.
Yeah, because like if you could learn at instant speed for an instant, I can go grab a counter spell or a removal spell or
Yes. And yeah. And it's like, okay, they have prowess triggers. So if they like learn for this and then like use that lesson to dig for another card, it could just, it can get really messy. So none of that. So it's all on sorceries. And then for the learn cards, I've only put them on instants and sorceries. This is just adding kind of like a one-time like learn effect to a variety of instants and sorceries. That kind of gave me the just mass I needed in order to actually like get this as a mechanic that like you're seeing consistently.
Yeah, and I find that so interesting, particularly with learn, because like you said, there aren't that many that made it into the zeitgeist early on. Like the fact that Professor of Symbology is still like the hallmark of, hey, this is what this should look like. Well, yeah, you can't. Where do you go from a 2-mana 2/1?
Exactly. Yeah, and iTwitch is definitely getting a moment now as well, where the newer lessons have really souped it up. But you're definitely right, like especially from a limited perspective, like Professor of Symbology was really like the cream of the crop. And so it's been a little tricky, actually, like finding the right effects and finding the right balance on where to put these cards. Someone at Boston Cube Party was actually talking to me about this, where it's like you have like another axis that you're like editing and like working with these cards on that like adds a layer of complexity. And I never really thought of it that way, but it gives me a lot more room to make power outliers.
Lots of opportunities on the top end for sure.
Yes. There's been a lot of trial and error, including at Boston Cube Party, where I was told that putting learn on giant growth was a big mistake, and was served evidence of it on stream. But a lot of trial and error there. I'm not a game designer by trade, and so I've kind of been like relearning and reinventing a lot of decisions that I'm sure Wizards kind of made along this path. You don't want to put any kind of like regrowth or rebuy effect on a lesson. That is a mistake I made, and it led to some repetitive play patterns in some matches where it's like, okay, like I use my removal spell that learns. I use that to grab a lesson that will buy back the removal spell. And and I was like, I was trying to put like ones that were below rate, and it still just was not a fun process.
Yeah, so how much of that is trial and error? Like, there's just like, I'm just going to slap this on here and see if this plays correctly versus just the theory crafting. How does that work for you?
Yeah, it's been a lot of trial and error. One thing that's kind of nice is that there aren't that many monocolored sorceries, and so it's not hard to look at them all. And so I've definitely looked at every single monocolored sorcery and been like, maybe. I think the biggest barometer I've used is kind of looking at the original sorceries and kind of determining like what makes these good and like how do I keep things from like being like above rate. And then giving myself kind of like a little bit of wiggle room because it is cube. I'm trying to make it feel like retail limited, and I've done a lot of things to enable that. But at the end of the day, like, these are going to be more powerful cards. The original Strixhaven set had 2 separate vanilla creatures, and I don't have anything on that power level. Every card in the pack is going to be, like, stronger than, like, the weakest card in the pack in a Strixhaven pack, right?
Yeah.
But honestly, it is a lot of, like, making mistakes and getting messy and learning. There were some that hit.
Are we quoting Miss Frizzle here?
Yeah, oh, for sure.
It's Magic School Bus, yeah. Make mistakes,
Yeah,
get messy.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm a big believer in diving in and just kind of, like, figuring it out. And just, like, getting feedback from other people. Because sometimes, like, you look at something and it's like, well, this doesn't seem that broken. And it's, like, very useful to have other players just kind of, like, talk you out of that.
They will tell you.
Oh, yeah. Like, balance is obviously important, but the 2 drivers for, like, what I've put learn and, like, lesson on, one of them is I do want it to be on cards that are, like, going to get people excited. Like, I want people to see a card with learn and be like, holy crap, that has learn? Like, who put learn on that?
Yeah.
There's a couple reasons for that. One is, like, I think it makes for a better experience, like, in the draft. The other one is that it pulls people into the mechanic that I'm trying to, like, make first class here, right? Like, I want people to draft lesson and learn, and I want it to be good. Like, I do not want the marquee feature of my cube to be a trap.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, because that would be just, like, the worst. I talk about, like, oh, like, I've pushed the envelope in places, I've put, like, learn on giant growth and it was busted, and, like, part of the reason I'm doing that is because I would hate to go the opposite direction and, like, way undershoot on these and, like, have cards that are just completely stone cold unplayable, and, like, have lesson and learn, like, just be something you should ignore during the draft, and you should just draft a strong deck that crushes everyone else, right?
Yeah, you'd rather the cool thing be tuned a little too hot, that it's, something you want to do.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. The other kind of, like, motivating factor is, like, just trying to put it on cards that I think are cool. It kind of goes into, like, the exciting part of it, but, like, I think it is fun. It's let me pull in a lot of cards that you don't normally see in Cube, some of which are very iconic. One of my lessons, which has been a lesson since day 1 of the Cube, is Lava Spike. And so, people can just have up to, like, 6 points of burn, like, in their sideboard that they can go learn for. It's one of those things where it's like, I don't know how often you see, like, Lava Spike in a cube, right? Like, it's just not really a thing people support that much, and it's usually, too weak to be supported. You can't get that critical mass of burn. It lets me pull in a lot of, like, fun effects that normally might be underpowered in cube or not see as much play, and, like, kind of get those into the environment and get people thinking about them a new way, which I think is really fun.
Yeah, it seems so fascinating to try to balance around, or to even just exploring in the space of something like learn, because that's basically just going to redraw a card in this environment more than almost any place else, right? Because you have so many lessons, it is, and maybe not even just draw a card, it is go get a very specific subset of cards.
Yes. So I do definitely try and keep the lessons a little bit below rate in terms of, like, what they're doing. So, like, Lava Spike, obviously, like, it's a powerful effect, but it's only dealing 3 damage. It's not actually affecting the board. Another one I like a lot, we haven't talked about the themes much of the cube, but the blue-white theme is soldiers and, like, soldier tokens. And there's a lesson, Secure the Scene, which I think is from, like, a core set. And it's a 5-mana sorcery that exiles target non-land permanent and makes a 1/1. 1, it's, like, great from a flavor perspective. 2, it's, like, very weak for a removal spell, right? Like, you don't want that in a cube where you also have Swords to Plowshares, generally speaking. So, trying to find lessons that will be strong to tutor and, like, strong in the right situation, but not so strong that people are going to want to be, like, running them in the main.
Yeah, and when something like Secure the Scene specifically parallels so well to something like Introduction to Annihilation, your colorless answer that is a little more ubiquitous. But this is like, if you're in the color, you get to do something a little more targeted and a little more on theme, which I think is a nice balance when you can strike it.
Yeah, and it was also just, like, nice to have that, like, template, because Introduction to Annihilation is also in, but, like, it's nice to have that template of, like, okay, like, this is, like, a pretty acceptable rate for a lesson.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that you mentioned there thinking about the kind of cards that you wouldn't necessarily want to put in your main board. How do you balance that in a cube draft where you don't always have as many extra picks that may not want to live in the main deck?
Yeah, there's a couple things I've done. I've tried to up the number of colorless cards. So there's a couple of cards that are like flavorful and like from the original Strixhaven or from like the different planes that like we're studying abroad to, that kind of give people an outlet in terms of like, you've got Campus Guide where it's like, all right, like you late in the pack might pick this up and it's not the best card in the world, but like that's a 2-drop, like it'll fill out your curve, that kind of thing. There also are all the colorless lessons, and something we haven't mentioned yet as well is that I break singleton pretty heavily in the cube. So the colorless lessons are actually all 4-ofs, with one exception. That is Mascot Exhibition. That is a 1-of.
You mean you don't want 4 of those? Come on.
No. I think that might have some adverse effects on the draft environment. But yeah, so, you've got stuff like Introduction to Prophecy, which is like a 3-mana preordain basically for colorless, and it's like that helps people if they aren't in a good seat and they aren't like kind of reading it correctly, like helps them maybe pick up a lesson like later in the pack, and it's like, okay, like that's not something ideal to be learning for, but it's at least something, right? And that lets you get a full card off of your learn keyword. Another thing I've done, which is something that is done in most kind of like 2-color guild sets, is you try and make the different tri-color combinations work well together. So in the original Strixhaven, this is like the different wedges like all work together, right? So Jeskai is like Prismari and Lorehold together, and like there was like cross synergy there in terms of the decks you could build, and that was kind of like true across all of them. There are cards in blue that will play well with cards in white in the original Strixhaven, and it's like not like a super direct synergy or like anything like you go looking for in the draft, but it gives you an outlet in terms of like, shoot, like I'm in white-red and I'm getting cut super hard, but blue's pretty open, so I can like take these blue cards and kind of cobble together like a 3-color deck out of that, and like, like all my fixing kind of lines like along this axis as well. And so that kind of helps like pad out the full draft experience and let people splash like stuff off that way.
Yeah, and I think this is something that's worth exploring here too, that Strixhaven, famously an enemy colored set, how did you take and pivot that to ally? Because that's not available in Strixhaven.
Right. This is one of the pieces of the cube that's changed the most over time and has been a big part of like my development as a cube designer. So when I first started on Strixhaven Study Abroad, I really wanted to do what the original Strixhaven had done and kind of look at these color pairs in a new light and take them and do something cool and new that maybe wasn't always done in Cube. And so the original theme had very out there interpretations of the color pairs. The red-green archetype was Storm. And yeah,
excellent.
Which, admittedly, a lot of what I do in Cube design is just put stuff that I really liked from different sets, and like red-green Storm in MH2 is one of my favorite draft archetypes of all time. So I was kind of trying to relive the dream there. Like green-white was going to be like control, and it was going to be kind of like a rampy kind of control where it's like, okay, you like ramp into like big stuff and go over the top of your opponent and maybe use like wraths or stuff like that. I think there is potential, and like, who knows, maybe that's what we're going to see in Hexhaven. But if I could make my own cards, I believe you could make allied colored factions that like support it along this axis. I found myself swimming upstream a lot with this, and I kind of had to cut my losses a little bit on this and adapt the design of the color pairs into something that worked better like with pre-existing Magic cards. This also kind of coincided with some playtests I was doing where I'm now in New York, and I was doing them with the wonderful Upkeep playgroup and getting a ton of good advice there. Shout out Upkeep.
Shout out Upkeep.
Scott's going to kill me for only mentioning that 30 minutes into the podcast. But yeah, I got some really good feedback. I think it was from Dan. Don't remember for sure if it was, but it was to maybe focus more in on flavor. And like, I think he might have been the one that suggested like doing it like each color pair is like themed around a plane. Because at first I was just kind of like theming it very mechanically, and I was not a very aesthetics minded person when it came to cube design. I didn't really think about that at all. And I gave it this really like fun hook that let me both pull it in a direction that had like a little bit more mechanical cohesion and like worked better with like what those color pairs tend to do in general. And then also gave me like the cards to kind of like flatten out some of the synergies a little bit and maybe like lean a little bit less on having these be like only like the super synergistic cards and have more just like, okay, this is like a generically pretty good card that can go in like a green-red deck or a white-green deck. And it's kind of like in keeping with the theme of like, oh, we're on these planes and like we're learning from like these different like wizards and whatever that are there. We're getting this like kind of tour of the multiverse.
These are guest professors are your legends,
Right, yeah, exactly. Or just like stuff like maybe, you know, the Strixhaven students are experiencing or seeing like on their journeys. I'm more aesthetically minded than I was, but you know, it's still up to interpretation from the cubers. That's where I kind of landed on the themes that I have now. So it ended up being blue-white is soldiers, and it's themed around Dominaria. There's a ton of like really good like aesthetic decisions I got to make there in terms of making it feel very historical. So I try and use like old border cards wherever possible. There's like some classic like bangers, like Decree of Justice is like that kind of thing. Blue-black is zombies, and it's themed around Innistrad. Red-black is Burn, and it is themed around Ravnica and Rakdos specifically. Red-green is X-Spells now, and it is themed around Bloomburrow. And white-green is newly Heroic, and it's themed around Theros. That's actually a little bit different from the previous iteration of the cube. So this has all like been shifting and changing. That was like Zendikar and Landfall for a while. Kind of a nod to that original like ramp and control deck.
Mm-hmm.
But still felt like the connection wasn't really flowing and the play patterns weren't fun. And so I recently like tried out switching it over to Heroic, and I've been pretty happy with the results so far.
This may be a dangerous way to ask this, but how settled is this curriculum? Like, how likely is it that you're going to change to some different planes in the future?
Oh man, my wallet needs me to stop doing it. But but no, I'm very much a perfectionist, and I love to tinker with this cube, and so I keep blowing up the cube every couple months. And I want to keep this set for now. I think it's in a pretty good spot. There are some things I want to tie together a little bit tighter, but I do think for the most part, it's pretty coherent in terms of like how things flow across the different shards and how they all kind of like interact and work together. So for the foreseeable future, I'm trying to stick with this. I did have like a whole moment where I was like, wait a second, like green and red have both supported sacrifice archetypes, but they've never really been done together. You could totally build a red-green sacrifice like archetype, and I was like, no, don't do this, Mark.
Sounds like we're going to Jend.
Yeah, we'll see. If we get Return to Jund, I'll think about it.
We're probably not far off. You never know.
Yeah, we feel due for that.
So I imagine with the hooks of lesson and learn and the openness of a school, you know, you could go study anywhere. Like I imagine having those planes help provide an anchor for like some directions to go. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, for sure. It provided just like a lot of structure. Like I've mentioned, like the North Star of this is like I want it to feel like a limited environment. And so I think part of that was like not every card is going to be like directly propping up some synergy. Like there needs to be just kind of like generically like good or pretty good cards that like support your archetypes and your decks, not even your archetypes, just your decks. And when you're looking at like all of Magic, it's like, what do you even put there? Like, okay, I have the original Strixhaven, and now I have Secrets of Strixhaven to kind of like work with. But it really gave me like a way of like limiting it down and looking at like, okay, like when I need just like a random 2-drop that doesn't need to be super synergistic, what can I pull from? Like having like a much smaller list is much, much better. And you find like little cross synergies and like a lot of emergent stuff that's like not the most like over the top, hit you on the head synergistic, but like still kind of
Like loud enough.
right, exactly. Like I'm thinking like I have one card from Bloomberg that cares about raccoons, right? Moira, I believe is her name. So like putting in like my 2-drops, it's like, oh, okay, like I can put in Bark Knuckle Brawler, I think is the name of it, where it's like a 3/2 for 2, and like that can be like my 2-drop because it's like a raccoon as well, but it's also like green-white is fine playing that because it's like an aggressively statted creature that can sometimes get indestructible, and it all like works, right?
Yeah, nice when those overlap for sure.
Right.
So to echo something you mentioned earlier, kind of with breaking singleton on a whole lot of things,
Right.
how much does that impact your desire to make changes if that represents moving many pieces at once?
One thing that's really nice about it, which is a big part of the reason I did it, is it gives me kind of another dimension to make changes along. It just gives me another lever to pull. So I think it actually makes me more willing and more able to make changes, especially that card I just mentioned went down from a 2 of to a 1 of because it really performed really strongly at Boston Cube Party, and I got a ton of feedback that it's like, hey, this is just like a modern, like very strong rare, and the raccoons I'd added like to it like had really been bolstering it. But it's very critical to the archetype, right? And I don't want to cut it entirely. And so going from 2 to 1, it's like, okay, this is going to show up way less frequently. You're going to have to dedicate like one pick to it. You can never have 2 copies of it. It lets me like kind of like tune down cards that are maybe too strong without fully removing them from the format.
Interesting. So actually kind of like a limited, retail limited sensibility of
Right.
Like, there are powerful things, they will just appear in
Yeah.
less frequency.
That is a key design philosophy I've embraced. There are cards that I know and acknowledge are more powerful than other cards, and I've said that's fine. The mitigating factors are there's only one copy, and the cube is massively oversized. Not massively, but it is oversized. The numbers have kind of been shifty. I've been playing around with pack size, but about 2/3 of it gets drafted in any given draft. And so about a third of the time, that card's just not going to be in the pool.
Interesting. Yeah, so I think your current count is 487. Yeah, so you're not going to see, you're not guaranteed to see all these every time, right? Like, no,
Right, yeah.
You're not guaranteed that somebody's going to pick up Mascot Exhibition or the Moira that you
Exactly.
mentioned.
Yeah. A nice round, even 487. Yeah, I've been tinkering post Boston Cube Party. I want to get it more even. But yes, the idea there is you're not going to see these as consistently. One other thing I've done to try and make it a little bit closer to retail limited is I do 3x14 for pack size. I really wanted there to be more pressure on picks in terms of making playables and like having to like take cards like highly that kind of like fill out your curve or like maybe like do a specific thing for you, and not being able to kind of like make assumptions like, well, I can grab this land now because like I'm gonna be fine, like, that kind of deal. Because I think that like creates a much more limited experience of like, I've seen Campus Guide in decks, and it's like, yep, yeah, you need that card. That's a good card in your deck. That was the right thing you needed to pick up. I want an environment where sometimes you're scrapping and you're like, thank God, like I wield the Campus Guide. That is something big I want.
Yeah, well, and like with something like Lesson Learned too, in a normal draft, if you end up with 45 cards and a broad portion of those are just kind of guaranteed to be sideboard slots, you have so much flexibility already. So
Right.
it seems like there's wisdom in crunching that down and forcing into more direct decisions.
I really wanted lessons to be like, I think lessons are like the big factor in the draft because it's such a decision point on like, do I take this card, which is like more powerful objectively, but I could take this other card that I'll have access to every single game. And it's like, which one of those, like, am I weighing in this moment? And it's a really hard decision in a lot of different scenarios. And it's really tough to know, like, when to prioritize them and when not to.
And that's the game, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. And see, that's why I'm such a sucker for desert drafts. Force people into difficult decisions.
Yes. I think Lesson and Learn it's the second closest Wizards has gotten to doing a desert draft, like in a retail limited environment. The first closest, of course, just being Snow.
Right, because you have to draft those, right? You can't play them.
Right, yeah. It's like, oh, you got to draft a basic land. Yeah, but then Lesson Learn, like, really does, I think, operate on the same axis as Desert Cubes, while being a little bit less intense because, you don't have to engage with it, right? Like, your deck, I think, will be weaker if you don't draft Lesson and Learn, but, like, it happens pretty frequently that people just don't draft Lesson cards or just don't end up with Learn cards. Their deck functions, right? Like, it's not like a Desert Cube where it's like you literally can't play the game. Like, you're just kind of playing on like a different axis.
Well, but it's sort of there on the tin too, right? You've described this as an environment that's centered around that. And I would say that's a success of the design then if it is an important enough part of the environment that you suffer if you don't take it.
Yeah, 100%.
Maybe not to oversell it. That's a weird way to say it. Like, if you suffer, that's a good thing. No, it is good that it pushes you to make a decision like that.
Yes. And I think it's good it rewards you for making that decision correctly, right? And making that hard choice of, yeah, like, this card is better, but, like, I do need this lesson. Like, I need to, like, fill out my board, or I just need something to grab at this point.
Yeah. Strixhaven, famous for its bonus sheet, both in the first and second iteration. Was that something you ever considered in the spells flavor?
Yeah. So the original draft had a more explicit collation strategy where I had like a set of cards that was like just shy of 360, and then I would seed in 8 mystical archive cards from a bonus sheet like into the cube. I ended up dropping this, but I definitely philosophically still hold on to it. So I've cut some of the more egregious power outliers in terms of like what was on that original bonus sheet. Then there were some like cards that didn't work as well that I ended up just kind of like cutting. But I definitely still try and include some power outliers in the spell slot. That is something I kind of like another guiding principle is that I want like swords is allowed to be in the cube, and it's like by far and away the best removal spell in the cube, but it's like, it's the mystical archive card. Like, you gotta have it, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. And I think it's a little bit less egregious when, like, your obscene outlier is, like, a removal spell, because, like, even if it takes out their 5-drop or whatever, like, it's still, you hit some random uncommon, right?
Yeah. Like, it's high impact, but it's, like,
Right.
the best it can do is be a removal spell.
Right, yeah. And, like, to give you an example of a card that was too egregious is I tried out having Fractured Identity in the cube for a little bit, and that was not okay. That was bad. It is an iconic allied color spell, but it is too good.
And its mystical archive printing is from a secret layer too, so
Yes, yeah.
not even proper bonus sheet.
No. But yeah, so I've tried to incorporate that in a little bit here and there. And also just like, I mean, the Mystical Archive art is beautiful and amazing, and that frame rules. So I just try and have as much of it as I can in. I've shied away from a exact collation strategy, though. I really want my cube to be run at events, and that's frankly been a motivator for me in terms of not organizing that specifically, because it kind of makes things an extra headache there. There's also, as maybe evidenced by some of my comments on game philosophy of just trying stuff out and also having 487 cards in a cube, I'm not the most organized person. And so, like, just being able to throw all my cards together, mush them into a pile, and then separate them out and draft them is pretty useful. So, still trying to, like, pay homage to it. I've got Lightning Bolt, in there, like, that kind of stuff, but more of a wink than like a full-blown strategy or like structured thing.
Sure. Well, and to echo, it is hard to overstate the value of being able to recruit your friends to help shuffle a cube. The more you have to explain, oh, no, set that stack over here, and we're going to start weaving these. Like, as soon as you get to that point, their eyes glaze over.
Yeah.
And
100%. Yeah, I would have to maybe like do that on my own, and like the Upkeep group, like we meet Wednesday nights, and so it's like I'm coming straight from work, and it's like, well, if I just like grab my cube or whatever, like I don't have time to like really do all that from like the last time it was played. One little logistical thing I do, which I am a little proud of, is the lessons are in a different colored sleeve in the cube, which has thrown people off, but it's just like a nice little UX thing in terms of avoiding them getting shuffled into the main deck in between rounds. It's kind of funny because Strixhaven was a set released during the pandemic, and so I don't know how many people actually played it like in paper. It was not like very commonly done, and so I think this was like something we just kind of all avoided having to do in paper with the original set, that I had to learn the hard way 2 drafts into the cube of being like, this keeps happening, huh?
Well, especially in cube, everything's sleeved the same way.
Yeah. Exactly.
So when you say sleeved differently, like the whole card back is different, or is it like an inner sleeve thing?
Straight up a different color of sleeve.
Okay.
It has been a little controversial. I think it's worked pretty well. I think especially because like I could do an inner, but like I think the problem is like people just kind of like when they've lost a game, they're going to game 2 or whatever, they like take the whole graveyard and just start shuffling like into the deck.
Yeah.
I think it'd be very easy to just like miss that inner sleeve and like end up there. And then the big headache is, so like in the ideal situation, you draw that lesson And then it's like, oh shoot, like this shouldn't be in my deck. Can I put this off to the side and like draw my real card now?
Right.
The really hard one to manage is, oh shoot, I went to learn for this lesson and it's not in my sideboard anymore. It's probably in my main deck. I guess I need to go search it out. So just trying to avoid that little complication. But yeah, other than that, it's a normal cube. You just shuffle it up and divide it up. A bunch of cards get set away, and you just draft from there.
Just to make sure I'm hearing all that. So the lessons being sleeved differently, does that mean you basically can't play them in the main deck, or do you just do it and just if it comes up, it comes up?
Yeah, I keep extra sleeves with the cube, just in case people want to do that. As we kind of talked about earlier, I've generally tried to tune the lessons into these are not cards you want to have in the main deck. It's happened a couple times, though, and, it's not that big a deal. Just give people the right red-colored sleeves and, like, have them swap it out and swap back again after the draft.
That's cool. I love it. Now that I'm hearing the full application, I've come back around to the solution that you have experienced through iteration.
Yeah. And I think it is, like, kind of like a nice, like, subtle nod towards, like, hey, like, these cards are worse. Like, you probably shouldn't put them in your main deck.
Interesting. Yeah, so it's kind of like a coaching tool for folks who are figuring it out.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah. Something interesting is, I don't think of Strixhaven as being that old a set, but a lot of people I've talked to have just, like, never played it or drafted with Lesson Learn, and it's, like, their first experience with it. And so it's been kind of interesting, like, having that experience with a lot of people coming through.
Yeah, that is unfortunate to think of 2021 as being that long ago, but, it's been a bit.
It's been a bit.
Well, Mark, as you think through Strixhaven Study Abroad, what advice from your experience here would you want to share with other designers as they're considering their own cube projects?
Yeah, I think the number one piece of advice is just start putting cards together and, like, drafting them. I know that's pretty generic advice, but, like, nothing really tests a cube like actually getting in there and putting things together. And it was just, like, try stuff out. Like, you never know what's going to work and what isn't going to work until you've actually done it. And even the iterations of Strixhaven Study Abroad, which had horrifically overpowered cards, were a good time to draft and a funny story looking back on it, and got the cube to the place it's in now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, stories can be valuable on both sides.
100%.
And you'd certainly rather learn by trying it than by being too gentle on something like this, too.
Oh, 100%. Like, what I said about cards that, like, keep people excited, like, that is really, like, people love to knock on Fire design, but, like, I do think it's, like, such a smart design philosophy for Limited in terms of, like, people should want to play your cube. They should be, like, excited about the things they're doing in your cube, like, in the decks that they're drafting. Don't be afraid of, like, things feeling too good or too powerful. Like, worry about them when they're, like, running away with the game, like, not necessarily if they, like, seem too good at first glance.
And your players will tell you if that happens.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Mark, this has been a whole lot of fun. Before I let you go, though, I do want to ask you one of my favorite questions by way of wrap-up, which is, if you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would you pick, and who would you have do the illustration?
I'm going to expose myself now because I'm not really an artist guy. I don't really know, like, an artist off the top of my head.
Well, see, Mark, you already did expose yourself here. You mentioned you weren't very aesthetically driven.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. Dang. Well, all right. I do think one of my favorite cards is Flicker Wisp. And I think we're overdue, I think, for a new fancy printing of it. I think it's just such a simple and beautiful card that has one line of text with a billion different applications. And I'd love to see, like, a more abstract, like, take on it, kind of like the Eclipsed creatures that we got from this latest Return to Lorwyn. I don't know exactly who that would be. I'm sure they're all lovely artists with real names. But one of them. Because I remember liking those arts. Who did the Mutavault art? The Mutavault, the Explorer guy? I love that card.
Mutable Explorer?
Mutable Explorer and Felicita Sala. I love that art. I would love a Flicker Wisp with this kind of style of art.
That would be really charming and whimsical for a creature that is incredibly terrifying when you think about it for a second.
I feel like it could be pulled off.
But that's the whole charm of like particularly Lorwyn, right? It's a bunch of things that are spooky around the edges that are also just whimsical.
Yeah, spooky and whimsical. A lovely aesthetic.
Good mix. Well, Mark, this has been a blast, and I'm so grateful to you for taking the time to take us on this guided tour of a whole set of guided tours, really, in Strixhaven Study Abroad. If folks want to follow up some with you, if they want to explore this project or anything else you're working on, where would be the best place for us to point them?
You can find me on Blue Sky. My username is 4DeltaVictor. I am also on Discord. My username is just mark.restrepo. So yeah, feel free to hit me up. I'm in the Upkeep server pretty regularly. That's kind of where I post and chat about things. So you can find me any of those spots.
Sounds like go to New York and play some Cube, too.
Yeah, go to New York, come to Wednesday, Brooklyn game night, 7 p.m. Play against some very good players with very good vibes.
I love that. That's a great ad for that, too. Great players, great vibes in New York.
It is honestly really special to have a group of absolute killers who will body you week by week, who are also just very, very nice and very chill about it.
Absolutely. Like, that's the balance you want. It's really the best of both worlds there.
Yeah, 100%.
That's awesome. Well, Mark, thank you so much again. Really appreciate you. Appreciate your time. Yeah. And this is such a cool project. And I hope more people take the opportunity to study abroad.
Thank you for having me on the podcast. It's been awesome talking with you.